My dad pointed at me in front of the judge, who, coincidentally, was his friend, and said, "This girl only knows how to waste what she doesn't deserve." He was demanding the entire fortune my grandfather had left me in his will. The judge nodded, and his lawyer smiled, certain of victory. Then I said two words that made the judge turn pale. "I'm Miranda, 27 years old." And my father just pointed at me in front of a judge who happened to be his friend and said, "This girl only knows how to waste what she doesn't deserve." He was demanding every penny of the fortune my grandfather left specifically to me in his will. The judge nodded in agreement, while my father's lawyer smiled, certain of victory. But here's what they didn't know. I'd been expecting this conspiracy ever since I saw those photos of them together during my father's campaign years ago. Politicians and their buddies really think they're so clever, don't they? When I saw that judge nodding like my father's personal cheerleader, I knew exactly what was happening. And I'd come prepared. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely betrayed by family. Because what I said next left that judge pale and my father completely silent. You'll definitely want to stick around for this. Let me take you back to where this all started. This story begins 27 years ago, when I took my first breath and my mother took her last. Congressman Richard Hayes never wanted to be a father. He made that crystal clear from day one, when he decided that a newborn baby was somehow responsible for complications during childbirth. Yeah, you heard that right. My father blamed me for my mother's death. Real winner. This guy. While he was busy building his political career and pointing fingers at an infant, my paternal grandparents stepped in. Patricia and William Hayes weren't just my lifeline, they became my entire world. They took me home from the hospital while my father disappeared back to Washington, probably relieved he wouldn't have to figure out how to raise the daughter he'd never wanted in the first place. And honestly, his loss became my gain. Growing up in their house was like living in a fairy tale, except the prince in this story wanted absolutely nothing to do with the princess. Grandpa William would read me bedtime stories every night, while Grandma Patricia taught me how to paint watercolors in her sunny art room. They filled every birthday, every Christmas, every school event with so much love that I almost forgot there was supposed to be someone else there. Almost. Christmas mornings were perfect until I'd catch Grandma Patricia staring at her phone, hoping for a call that never came. Grandpa William would clear his throat and distract me with another present. But I could see the disappointment in his eyes every single time. The first time I asked why Daddy never visited, I was probably 5. Grandma Patricia's face crumpled for just a second before she composed herself and said, "He's very busy helping people, sweetheart, important work." Even at 5, I could smell the BS in that explanation. But I learned not to ask, because every question about my father made the two people I loved most in the world look like someone had stepped on their hearts. By middle school, I'd stopped expecting him altogether. Parent-teacher conferences, Grandpa William was there taking notes. School plays, Grandma Patricia in the front row with that ancient camcorder she refused to replace. Father-daughter dances, Grandpa William spinning me around the floor while I pretended not to notice the other girls with their actual fathers. But here's the thing, we were happy. Really, genuinely happy. Just the 3 of us against the world. The pattern of my father's absence became so predictable I could have set a calendar by it. Christmas brought expensive gifts delivered by his assistant with no personal note. Birthdays meant generic cards signed by someone who definitely wasn't him. Graduation. Radio silence so complete you'd think I'd cease to exist. Meanwhile, Congressman Hayes was thriving on television, giving passionate speeches about the importance of supporting our children and building strong family foundations. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a chainsaw. I'd see him on TV and think, yeah, tell me more about family support, Dad, I'm all ears. When I turned 16, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was teenage rebellion, or maybe I just got tired of pretending his absence didn't sting. I started asking the hard questions. Why doesn't he ever call me? I demanded one evening after seeing him on CNN discussing education reform. He talks about children's futures on national television, but he can't remember his own daughter has one. Grandpa William set down his newspaper slowly and said, "Your father is dealing with complicated feelings about your mother's death, sweetheart. Grief affects people differently." I shot back. "For 16 years, that's not grief. Grandpa, that's a choice. A really crappy one." Grandma Patricia's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. After 16 years of making excuses for their son, even they were running out of believable explanations. High school brought college preparation, and my grandparents went all out: SAT tutors, college visits, application fees. They supported every dream I mentioned. When I got into Duke University with a partial scholarship, they threw a celebration dinner that could have fed a small country. My father's response: a congratulations card with typed text and his assistant's initials at the bottom. Not even the courtesy of a personal signature. That's when I officially stopped caring whether he acknowledged my existence. I mean, what's the point of wanting approval from someone who treats you like an inconvenience he never signed up for? I graduated summa cum laude with a business degree. Grandpa William cried during my valedictorian speech. Grandma Patricia took approximately 300 photos. My father's reserved seat remained empty. As always, everything changed the summer I turned 24. Grandpa William had been slowing down for months, but we'd all pretended not to notice. The man who'd built a business empire from nothing was suddenly forgetting meeting times and losing track of conversations. When the doctors finally convinced him to get checked out, the diagnosis hit like a freight train: advanced stage cancer. 6 months, maybe less. He took the news with the same quiet dignity he'd shown me my entire life. But I watched something break inside Grandma Patricia that day. 3 months before he died, Grandpa William called me into his study. His lawyer was there, and I knew something important was about to happen. "Miranda," he said, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it, "I need you to understand something about this will." He explained that he was leaving everything to me: the business empire, the properties, the investments, the house we were sitting in, everything. "Your father made his choices a long time ago." Grandpa William continued. "He chose politics and ambition over family. He chose resentment over love. And I'll be damned if I let him profit from the very life he rejected." I tried to argue. "What about Dad? Won't this cause problems?" Grandpa William smiled sadly and said, "Your father has had 24 years to be a father. He chose not to. This money represents a lifetime of work, and it should go to someone who understands its real value. That's you, sweetheart." The lawyer made me sign documents confirming I understood the terms. Everything was airtight, witnessed, and legally unbreakable, or so we thought. When Grandpa William died, 3 months later, I felt like someone had torn out half my heart. The funeral was enormous: business partners, community leaders, people whose lives he'd touched over decades. And there, standing in the back row, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit, was my father. He hadn't visited once during those final months, not once. But he showed up for the funeral, and I saw him talking quietly with his lawyer in the parking lot afterward. Something about that conversation made my skin crawl. For exactly 1 year, I tried to grieve and heal. Grandma Patricia became more fragile without her husband of 50 years. She'd sit in his study for hours, touching his books, his papers, the reading glasses he'd left on his desk. We'd have tea together every afternoon, and she'd tell me stories about their life together, about my mother, about the values she hoped I'd carry forward. "Your grandfather and I wanted to show you what real love looks like," she told me one rainy afternoon. "We wanted you to know that family isn't just biology. It's choice and commitment and showing up every single day. When she died peacefully in her sleep one night, I was utterly alone for the first time in my life. The two people who'd raised me, loved me, protected me from my father's rejection, were both gone. I was 25 years old, with a massive fortune, and no one left who truly knew me. The grief was suffocating. I wandered through that big house, hearing their voices in every room, seeing their faces in every photograph. The only comfort I had was knowing I'd made them proud, that I'd grown into someone they could be proud of. 2 months after Grandma Patricia's funeral, my father's lawyer contacted mine. Congressman Richard Hayes was filing a lawsuit to overturn his father's will on the grounds that I was mentally incompetent to manage such wealth and that I'd been unduly influenced. The betrayal was so stunning, I actually laughed when my lawyer read me the complaint. My father, who hadn't spoken to me in years, who'd missed every important moment of my life, was now claiming concern about my well-being and my ability to manage money. The lawsuit stated I was young, inexperienced, and prone to wasteful spending, and that the estate should rightfully go to him as the direct biological son. I sat there in my lawyer's office, holding that complaint in shaking hands, and realized my father wasn't just neglectful. He was calculating. He'd waited for both his parents to die before making his move. This wasn't grief or concern. This was pure greed. The moment I read my father's name next to Judge Harold Crawford's on the case assignment, something clicked in my memory. I'd seen that name before. I spent 3 days in my grandfather's study, going through old photo albums and newspaper clippings from my father's political campaigns. And there it was. Photo after photo of Congressman Hayes and Judge Crawford at fundraisers, campaign rallies, charity golf tournaments. They weren't just acquaintances, they were friends, close friends, the kind of friends who do favors for each other. I hired a private investigator, and what she uncovered was even worse than I'd imagined. My father was drowning in debt, his political career had been expensive, and he'd made investments that had gone spectacularly wrong. He owed money to people who didn't take kindly to delays in repayment. He needed my inheritance to save himself. The investigator also found that Judge Crawford had ruled favorably in 3 previous cases involving my father's political allies. The pattern was clear. This wasn't going to be a fair trial. This was going to be a predetermined outcome with a judicial stamp of approval. My lawyer was pessimistic. "Miranda, this is bad," she said, spreading documents across her conference table. "The judge has already denied our motion for recusal. He claims his connection to your father is purely professional. We can appeal, but that takes time. And Judge Crawford can do a lot of damage before we get a new judge assigned." I asked what she recommended, and she sighed heavily. "Honestly, settle. Your father's willing to take 60% and let you keep 40. It's not fair. But fighting this in Crawford's courtroom is like playing poker with a rigged deck." That night, I sat in Grandpa William's study, surrounded by his books and his memory. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to settle. I wasn't going to let my father and his corrupt friend steal what my grandparents had built. I was going to walk into that courtroom and fight. But I needed leverage, something that would make Judge Crawford think twice about ruling against me. I went back to those campaign photos. I collected every image showing them together. I documented dates, events, and donations. I found newspaper articles mentioning their friendship. I built a file so comprehensive that no ethics board could ignore it. The morning of the trial, I sat in that courtroom, watching Judge Crawford take his seat with absolute confidence. He smiled at my father's lawyer. He barely acknowledged mine. The whole thing was theater, and everyone except me seemed to think the ending was already written. My father's lawyer presented their case first. He painted me as a spoiled, irresponsible young woman who'd waste the family fortune on luxury and frivolity. He brought in character witnesses who barely knew me but were happy to speculate about my competence. He showed bank statements of legitimate business expenses and called them reckless spending. Then it was my father's turn to testify. He sat in that witness box and lied with the ease of a career politician. "I'm deeply concerned about my daughter," he said, his voice dripping with false paternal worry. "She's young, she's grieving, and she's not equipped to handle this level of financial responsibility. My father would have wanted the family legacy protected, and I'm simply trying to honor his wishes." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. This man, who'd abandoned me as an infant, who'd missed every significant moment of my life, was now claiming to care about protecting me. Judge Crawford nodded along sympathetically, asking softball questions that let my father elaborate on his concerns. When my lawyer tried to object, the judge overruled her before she'd even finished speaking. The fix was so obvious, it was almost insulting. By lunchtime, I could see my lawyer's shoulders slumping in defeat. When we returned after the break, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Miranda, I don't think we can win this." I squeezed her hand and whispered back, "Just trust me. When I take the stand, let me do the talking." When they finally called me to testify, I walked to that witness box with my folder of evidence tucked under my arm. My father was smiling. His lawyer looked pleased. Judge Crawford was already leaning back in his chair, ready to wrap this whole charade up with a ruling in my father's favor. They had no idea what was about to happen. I sat down, placed my folder on the witness stand, and looked directly at Judge Crawford. My voice was steady as I began. "Your Honor, before we proceed further, I need to address a serious ethical concern about this case." The judge's smile faltered slightly. "What concern would that be?" I opened my folder and pulled out the first photograph. "This concern, you and my father at his campaign fundraiser in 2018. I laid it on the edge of the witness box, where everyone could see it. And this one from 2019 at a political golf tournament. And this one from 2021 at a charity gala, where you were seated at his table." I kept placing photos down one after another, building an undeniable visual record of their relationship. The courtroom had gone completely silent. "I have 17 photographs here, documenting your friendship with the plaintiff over the past 7 years. I also have records showing you've ruled favorably in 3 cases involving his political associates." Judge Crawford's face was shifting through color changes, from normal to pale, to an alarming shade of gray. His hands started shaking as he reached for his gavel. "I wasn't finished, Your Honor. I want to be very clear about what I'm saying here." I looked him directly in the eyes and delivered the line I'd been preparing for weeks. "If you rule favorably toward him, I will immediately turn over all proof that you two are friends to the appropriate authorities, including these public photos taken during his political campaigns. I have everything documented and ready to file." You cannot be both judge and his friend at the same time. This corruption would end your career. The courthouse fell so silent you could have heard a pin drop 3 counties away. Judge Crawford's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his gavel. The man who'd walked into this courtroom, confident in his ability to deliver a predetermined outcome, was suddenly realizing his entire judicial career was about to end in disgrace. "We are not friends," he stammered, his voice barely audible, "and I will not act favorably toward the plaintiff." His voice grew slightly stronger as he continued, probably figuring this was his only chance to save himself. "We have an explicit will here from a man who was clearly of sound mind when he wrote it. The medical evidence supports his mental competence at the time of writing. The witness testimony confirms his intentions were clear. There are absolutely no grounds for overturning his clearly stated wishes." He paused, swallowing hard. "The inheritance will remain exactly as William Hayes specified in his testament. Case dismissed." He banged his gavel with shaking hands and immediately bolted from the bench, not even bothering with proper closing procedures. My father sat frozen at his table, staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time in his life. 27 years of dismissing me as irrelevant. and I just demolished his entire scheme in under 30 minutes. The reporters were already rushing for the exits, cell phones pressed to their ears as they called in the story of the decade. As the courtroom emptied, my father slowly stood and walked toward me. For a moment, I thought he might actually try to apologize or explain or somehow salvage what was left of our relationship. Instead, he looked me in the eye and said, "You've destroyed everything I worked my entire life to build." I replied calmly, packing the photographs back into their folder. "No. I exposed what you actually built your life on. There's a difference." He left the courtroom without another word, his expensive lawyers trailing behind him like mourners at a funeral. 6 months later, I was standing in the garden behind what was now officially my house, watching the sunset paint the sky over the roses Grandma Patricia had planted decades ago. Judge Crawford had resigned within the week, citing health concerns that fooled absolutely no one. My father's career imploded even more spectacularly. The House Ethics Committee opened an investigation into his use of political connections for personal gain. Congressman Richard Hayes announced his resignation from Congress 3 months later, claiming he wanted to spend more time with family. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on anyone who knew our actual family history. But I wasn't interested in revenge or watching him suffer. I was too busy building the life my grandparents had always wanted me to have. I kept Grandpa Williams' business empire, but modernized the companies with practices that would have made him proud: employee profit sharing, environmental responsibility, community investment. The businesses thrived under management that actually cared about more than just quarterly profits. 8 months after the trial, I met David Richardson at a sustainable business conference where I was speaking about corporate responsibility. He was an environmental engineer who specialized in clean manufacturing processes, passionate about creating systems that worked for both companies and communities. Our first conversation lasted 4 hours and covered everything from renewable energy systems to the moral obligations of inherited wealth. He was intelligent, principled, and completely unimpressed by my money, which I found incredibly attractive. "I judge people by what they build, not what they inherit," he told me over coffee after our third date. "And what you're building with those companies is genuinely impressive." We were engaged within a year, married in the same church where I delivered eulogies for both my grandparents. It was a beautiful ceremony with close friends and the family I'd chosen, rather than the one I'd been born into. My father didn't attend, according to newspaper reports. He was too busy dealing with federal investigators looking into his political activities. David and I honeymooned in Ireland, visiting the countryside where Grandma Patricia's family had originated 3 generations earlier, standing on cliffs overlooking the Atlantic, holding hands with the man I loved. I felt the profound peace that comes from living authentically. A year later, we moved permanently into the main house where I'd grown up. We converted Grandpa Williams' study into David's home office and transformed Grandma Patricia's art room into a nursery. Our daughter, Patricia Rose Richardson, was born on a perfect spring morning, exactly 2 years after the trial that changed everything. She has David's gentle nature and my grandmother's bright eyes. Our son, William David Richardson, arrived 18 months later with my stubborn streak and his father's calm temperament. My children will grow up in the same house where I learned about love, loyalty, and the difference between family and biology. They'll hear stories about great-grandparents who showed them that the best inheritance isn't money, it's values, integrity, and the unshakable knowledge that they deserve love simply for existing. My father had spent his entire life chasing power and status that never satisfied him. He'd sacrificed every meaningful relationship for career advancement that ultimately meant nothing when his corruption was exposed. Meanwhile, I'd inherited something far more valuable than any fortune: the wisdom to recognize what actually matters and the strength to fight for it when necessary. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about family, justice, and the courage it takes to stand up for what's right. Drop a comment below, sharing your own experiences with family betrayal or overcoming impossible odds. Sometimes, the people who underestimate us the most are the ones who end up learning the hardest lessons about our true strength. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, the best inheritance isn't money or property. It's the values that guide us, the love that sustains us, and the confidence that comes from knowing exactly who we are and what we're worth. In the end, that's what my grandparents really left me. Not just financial security, but the unshakable knowledge that I was worthy of love, capable of strength, and destined for something infinitely better than the small, selfish life my father had chosen. And that inheritance will last for generations.